Facebook is in. YouTube is in. Okay.
Donald Trump is heading to the Capitol tonight to deliver his first State of the Union address. Now, the last time he did something like this, they didn't call it the State of the Union, it's just a joint address after he was inaugurated. And afterwards, that, if you remember, was when pundits across the cable country declared that he had become president. You know, he pointed to member of the military. He pointed to somebody's widow in the audience, kind of exploited her grief, talked about military heroism, and in that moment became presidential, according to the pundits. And in a way that I think they didn't mean it, there was some accuracy in that. There was something deeply American presidential about that. For the like days after, or maybe the day after that speech, Trump was kind of basking in the glow of this warm press that he had received. I don't remember the precise idiotic thing that happened right after that. Where the wheels started coming off and he was no longer getting that good press. It didn't last long because that's how Trump is. He just blows everything up, one day after another. But expect a replay of that. That speech was written kind of by what they call the New York liberals, or the Goldman Sachs liberals. You've got Gary Cohn, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Dina Powell, this crew of people who kind of recoil at the people who were at the Trump rallies, rather than having it being written by Steve Bannon, who wrote the inaugural address, which was famously about carnage and blood in the streets, and the world is going to hell, and Donald Trump is going to keep America safe, and it will be America first. So look for more of that globalist Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner wing to win out tonight, and look for him to celebrate the soaring stock market. Look for him to take credit for the tax cuts. I wouldn't even put it past him to talk about the DREAM Act and how he supports the DREAM Act and supports the Dreamers, because you have to remember that this is not somebody who's values a connection to reality. So he might just kind of mess with Democrats by bringing up immigration, saying it's something we ought to do about love. It could be, be prepared to see an unusually unifying and uplifting speech from a man who shows that he's able to read off of a teleprompter. Now, as we've seen in the past, none of that ever, or very little of it, actually translates into an agenda, and he goes right back to being the same Donald Trump he was. So if you have questions, Eric is going to kind of throw them up on here. Also, we just got our swag in. Here's our Eric's favorite Kofefi koozie, his resist koozie. And so, if you have any questions, we can do a Q&A on that. In the meantime, let me quick talk about a piece that Lee Fong and I did recently called the Dead Enders. This is, I encourage you, when you get a chance, you might have to wait for the weekend. It's awfully long. It's about how the Democratic Party, in the wake of 2016, might have been expected to take a little bit more of a hands-off approach to primaries. They got so burnt by so many in the base being furious about the way that they appeared to be tipping the scales for Hillary Clinton in the presidential primary. But instead of kind of stepping back, the establishment of the Democratic Party in race after House race across the country is stepping in to endorse a particular preferred candidate over an insurgent, kind of populist, progressive-backed candidates. In some cases, they have the backing of Justice Democrats or Our Revolution or Move On or Working Families Party or NARAL or any number of these outside groups that are getting involved in races, and they're having to compete against these establishment candidates. And the establishment candidates you don't have to read through, you don't have to read between the lines to figure out that they're getting the support of the party. The party, in many cases, has put out a press release and said, we are supporting this candidate. This is who we think we should win this primary, which raises the question, how good of a candidate is this if they need massive party support just to get through the primary against these other candidates who all they have is the support of a grassroots network and some small dollars. So if there are any questions about that or on the State of the Union, we can take those.
Well, actually,
Or about the swag, which I love the Kofefi one.
the first comment was a compliment about that article.
Oh, well, thank you.
Um,
Li Fong deserves much of the praise for that piece, but I'll take it.
okay, I want to throw at you something that Dan Rather said.
Okay.
There he is. So we have a new show in the TYT network that airs. Well, I'm getting there. Next time you'll be able to hear audio. Actually, if we weren't live on YouTube, I could do it on. I could do this, but anyways, it's a technical thing. So Rather was talking about the State of the Union, and what he said is, regardless of what Trump can read off a teleprompter and what he wants America to think of him or what his handlers do, the real question about our State of the Union, the real crisis, is how do we handle when the president endeavors to obstruct justice and hold himself above the law, how the public and how Congress and how our law enforcement agencies respond to this is actually much more impactful and says a lot more about our State of the Union than anything we might hear tonight.
You know, it's an interesting point because, and I think his politics and his approach to this question is really shaped by his experience of Watergate. And when I was growing up, and I'm not sure if it was this way for Eric, I used to hear a lot from my parents and from other people about Watergate. And it was told as a story with a happy ending that showed that no one is above the law in the American system of government. Did you get told that as a kid? Did that ever come up? I remember it, and maybe it came up a lot because I was a kid during the Reagan years, and he was under all of this fire, and so maybe my parents hoped that he was going to, be shown a similar door that Nixon was, but there was definitely this sense that Watergate proved that yes, there are bad people, but the system works, and that you should trust that you should trust the democratic republic that is the United States of America, and I think for years that was held up as an example not just of what can go wrong, but also what can go right. That crimes were committed, and the system, the immune system kicked in. It kind of identified a pathogen and evicted it from the body. And so Rather is making the case. It's an interesting one that if the system can't do that anymore, does the patient die? I think that equally as important and kind of related to his question is what's going on with the FBI right now, and the press has been covering the resignation of McCabe, and in this sense, I do think that the interest in this story is quite warranted. Now McCabe, who Trump pushed out, and who Trump said at one point on a phone call with him, ask your wife what it's like to be a loser, because his wife ran for a state legislative office in Virginia and lost. This is a bizarre man, our president. So McCabe was able to take enough paid time off in order to get to the March, which is where he can get full retirement, so he's out of here. And so in a way, Trump pushed him out. In another way, he kind of survived long enough that he was planning to retire soon anyway. But this is not just a typical retirement. This is somebody who represents a kind of nonpartisan FBI getting pushed out by elements within the government that want to seize power within the FBI. One of, I think, the least reported elements going on right now is who is the FBI director? What is he up to? I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Bente. That he is flying so far under the radar, while a huge faction of partisans is working to kind of seize the levers of power within the FBI, which is an extraordinarily powerful institution within our government. It's not an institution that was ever actually created or enacted by Congress. It was just created, and just grew and grew and grew, and now it obviously it exists and gets funding from Congress, but it's never been legally created. But it has a massive amount of power, and if it kind of falls into the hands of partisan actors, the damage that could be done to the system is extraordinary. And I think that goes even maybe beyond a point, but I think is related to what Rather was saying.
I highlighted that comment for you.
All right, from John Lehane. I'm curious of Speaker Ryan's comment on Fox, the notion of cleansing the FBI and DOJ, plus of McConnell too. Do you believe or think this attitude from them will affect into Trump's State of the Union? I don't know. Will it creep into his speech? If he wants a unifying speech, I don't know. If he might hint at wanting he might diss the FBI in kind of an underhanded or subtle reference to this. I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see on that one. But this is a really good question because this is what I'm talking about. Paul Ryan, talking about cleansing the FBI, it means trying to rid it of this. We've been extremely critical here of the FBI over the years. Its record has very little to recommend it overall. But in past decades, it has not been a partisan political tool, which is the most damaging thing that can happen in a democracy if you sick the federal investigators on enemies of the state or opponents of the government in a criminal way. That's how you wind up with political prisoners. And so for Paul Ryan to say that the FBI needs to be cleansed, it's fabricating, it's making up this idea that that it's some hotbed of democratic resistance that needs to be cleansed and returned to kind of normal apolitical hands, when in fact it's very political actors that would be stacked inside there. And of course, as with everything with Trump, the irony here is that it is 180 degrees backwards. Without the FBI and without James Comey's letter, it is extremely unlikely, according to all of the statistical analyses that have been done, that Trump even wins the election. James Comey and the FBI drove Clinton's numbers down enough so that the 3 million vote total that she had wasn't quite enough to win the Electoral College. Like that, you can talk about how bad of a candidate she was. You can talk about Russian interference. You can talk about anything else you want. That discrete data point, that FBI intervention in the campaign in the very last weeks, was instrumental in shifting it. And of course, now the Trump administration is going to turn on the FBI and try to take it over and turn it into a partisan political tool.
Sarah Talbot at the bottom.
Sarah Talbot says, I've heard senators using 3 words, constitutional crisis, in regards to ignoring the sanctions. What can they legally do? So I actually think that they're blowing this out of proportion here, and here's why. And so the background here is that Congress passed expanded sanctions on Russia, and the Trump administration has yet to enforce them. The reason I think they're blowing it out of proportion a little bit here is that this isn't necessarily new. My wife wants to FaceTime. Should we put her on?
Really?
Yeah.
Let's see if it's important.
Okay. Let me see if I can get her back. So it's not new. It is. It has been. Congress has been enacting sanctions for years, and then the president has the authority to kind of implement them, strengthen them, pull them back at his discretion. Now Trump is kind of abusing that discretion and not enacting them at all, but that's kind of within the range that's been done in the past, or it's slightly beyond the range, but it's within kind of the degrees that have been done in the past. So that's why I'm reluctant to call it a constitutional crisis. Hey, George. This is George. what do we got next? Hey, George, how you doing? What are you playing? Are you playing with trucks? That looks fun. You at the doctor's office? What did the doctor say? George might have a pink eye.
Oh, okay.
Doctor said truck. Okay, so John Lehane, Laura Berquist, the DLC DNC never learns. The establishment Democratic Party deserves to crash and burn. I'm saying so Laura, first of all, appeared to be tipping the scales of 2016. The reason I say appeared is that you had to, hey George, you had to, it wasn't hard to figure out what was going on, but you had to figure it out. They never put out a press release that said the Democratic National Committee, hey.
I'll hold it so you can see you.
Hey, the Democratic National Committee is endorsing Hillary Clinton in this 2016 primary. They never put that out publicly. The difference here is that they are in House races putting out statements, telling reporters, appearing with the candidate at events and saying, this is our woman or this is our man. Like they're doing it. So that's why I say appeared versus the way that they're doing it today. Now in some cases, hey George, now in some cases you do have to read between the lines at who's giving money to them, who has endorsed them to figure out whether is this actually an organized kind of amount of support from the party or not. On the question of the party, does the party have to die? Well, the party's going to do what the party's going to do. What our story is about is that there is a entire ecosystem, as you very much know, that is growing up separately from the mainline Democratic Party organizations. And so it consists of things like Our Revolution, Justice Democrats, PCCC, and this whole range, People's House Project, and then you've got the legacy ones from Netroots like DFA, PCCC, Move On, etc. All of these groups together collectively creating almost a second party. People say they want a third party. It sort of is a third party, but it's operating within the Democratic Party. And so the question is, will it become the dominant member of the coalition with the current establishment under it, or will it continue to be a dominated faction? And the primaries are going to answer some of those questions. What happened to Georgie?
Your wife said she doesn't really need to participate.
Oh, okay. She can if she wants. She can go online. Okay. Lawrence Wilkes. Seems to me that the DNC continues to diss Bernie Sanders, the potential presumptive frontrunner in 2020. Why not have him be the keynote speaker following the State of the Union on the Democratic side? He's going to give one online, which will probably draw more attention than Joseph Kennedy's speech. I think it'll be. I saw somebody describe Joseph Kennedy as an old man's version of a young person, which I thought was pretty good. It'll be interesting to see as it gets closer to the presidential primaries who they pick. In the past, and this is the irony, the party has been reluctant to put up prospective presidential candidates because they don't want to be accused of putting their thumb on the scale, which is quite the irony. So it's true. Bernie, I think, probably would have gotten a lot more attention. However, maybe Bernie even refused. I don't think this is true, but he if he were smart, he'd probably even refuse this. Everybody who gives the State of the Union afterwards, for the most part, just blows it. You're going up against somebody who has all of the majesty of the pomp and circumstance of the State of the Union. They're in this huge, this regal House of Representatives, the opposite of regal, I guess, and it just creates a magnetism around it, even if you're the biggest stiff on the planet. And then you go to somebody who's just kind of behind a podium reading a speech, and you might do a Marco Rubio thing where you get thirsty and start drinking water, and everybody clowns on you. I remember one year they put up, I think, was it Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, who just the most boring rebuttal you could ever imagine. The Republicans have flopped on that in the past. So I think it's probably smart that Bernie's just going to do his separate thing.
Okay, can you read 3? I'll highlight them one by one.
All right. So DCCC was very pro Hillary Clinton, but they aren't evil or anything. No, I don't think they're evil. DCCC is all bad, right? Not all bad.
And then this one.
There can be no revolution with everyone split several different directions, though, guys. Robbie Mook is a veteran of the DCCC. The DCCC creates a lot of consultants who then go on and work elsewhere in politics, including in Hillary Clinton's campaign. And I don't think they're evil. I don't think they're bad. They are propagating what I think is a failed approach to politics, which is finding kind of business-friendly, wealthy candidates who don't really take much of a position but have a lot of money to fund rather bland congressional campaigns. That's kind of their approach to it. The question on the can we be divided and have a revolution? I mean, almost every revolution that's ever been carried out has actually been carried out by a very small faction of people who were kind of the most radical and seized a moment of opportunity. And I don't think anybody thinks we're going to have that kind of a revolution here. But you don't need complete unity. What you need is 51% in the primaries, and then and then a path to victory in the general election. And a lot of these candidates that we wrote about here in this story, they say that what they believe politically is the right thing, but it is also pragmatically the way to win. That getting the base out, that energizing people, creating volunteers is a way to win, even in some of these Republican-leaning districts, that it is a more effective and pragmatic way than to try to find a centrist who plays Republican light. So they're making two arguments. And if that latter argument proves accurate and some of these populist candidates actually win in these R+5, R+10 districts, then that changes the way that the party orients itself toward that strategy. Morgeson Andre. Writing in from Germany here, honestly, I see 2018 and 2020 as the last chance for you guys to save your country. Can't speak for other generations, but at least mine throughout Europe were happy about Trump getting elected. Firstly, because it would finally bring about the collapse of the U.S. octopus around the world, and secondly, because it would make enough people up to start change your country needs so much. I think that there's a lot to that. I think if the kind of united front of the resistance plus everything else it throws itself against the wall in 2018 and 2020 and loses, then I think you're going to see locked-in Republican majorities for the foreseeable future, because they will control redistricting again and lock Democratic voters out. The Janus Supreme Court decision that's coming in the next who knows when will continue to decimate unions. And it's been shown that as public sector unions are crushed in states like Wisconsin or Michigan, the share of Democratic vote goes down by something around 3%, which might not sound like a lot, but in a swing state, it's enough to cost you tons of elections, to cost you the state, and in this case, to cost you the presidency. So if with all of this energy and all of this enthusiasm, all of this anger, and the public sector unions that still remain in force, they still can't get over the top, and Republicans are allowed to redistrict again and continue to pack the courts, then I think he's right that that the politics change dramatically, and what becomes achievable changes, and what resistance and what political activity looks like changes. But we're not there yet, but I do think that that's an accurate
So the other day was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I found that out about 11 o'clock at night. I'm sorry. I saw a tweet. Sure. So I watched a documentary that PBS Frontline was advertising, and the first line of the documentary was that when the Third Reich won power, it actually won a plurality but not a majority because there were 3 opposition parties trying to stop them. That was something I didn't know. The rest of it, the rest of it I don't want to comment on right now, but the politics before the Holocaust. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So the this memo was going to be right, and the left, the communists in Germany had a slogan that's since become kind of sardonically famous. That was kind of first Hitler, then us. And the argument was that Hitler would get elected, or Hitler would take power. He'd be such a disaster. He'd sharpen the contradictions between the parties, and the people then would see the failed practice of the fascists, and they would then swing over to the communists. So first Hitler, then us, and it became partly famous because he rounded up the socialists and the communists and put them in concentration camps first, before then moving on to what we all know eventually became of that Third Reich.
The memo they're talking about is Nunes' memo.
Right. So that the Nunes memo should be coming out soon. But yeah, so there was not a recognition among the opponents of Hitler until it was too late. However, I don't think that's quite the case here. I think even the far left here in the United States, and some of the most progressive elements, while they disagree sharply with the DNC or the DCCC, there is not the same level of blood feud that existed in the 1920s and 1930s in Germany, where all of these political factions were armed. All of them had their own security guards, armed factions were shooting each other. Like it was nothing compared to what we have now, which is some Twitter spats and some ugliness in Facebook threads.
So that memo, you want to comment, and also Jeremiah's talking about using GPS transcripts. I didn't even know those were out.
Yeah, those are good. The Glenn Simpson, they're long. You can read some summaries. The Glenn Simpson transcripts that are out are fascinating. He's the former Wall Street Journal reporter who went to work for Fusion GPS and did a lot of investigation into the Trump organization and Trump himself. Fascinating stuff that he found. Quickly on the Nunes memo, and then I should get back to editing. This is a 3.5-page document that Democrats say is filled with nonsense, innuendo, cherry-picked lies with no kind of underpinning raw intelligence, concocted to make Rod Rosenstein look like a criminal for extending a wiretap on Carter Page, but generally to try to make the point that the FBI was a rogue operation that was intent on electing Hillary Clinton president. Again, as we started with, the full irony being that without them, Trump wouldn't have been elected president. But that's par for the course, that the absolute opposite is always what seems to be going on.
Yeah, okay. So just I'll get you to respond to one last thing. It seems to me that the whole conspiracy is that whatever is found in this investigation by Robert Mueller, never mind about that. The problem is how and why it was began, and if it was begun for some reason that might have involved a Democrat's perspective, a Democrat paid for the dossier after the Republican newspaper started Fusion GPS with that dossier, so that basically you cannot have anybody who doesn't agree with the president investigating him at any point in the process, and what it actually finds isn't important.
Right. And Carter Page, and this may have been what Trump was referring to when he heard he was wiretapped, and he put it in quotes in the tweet while in Trump Tower, that Carter Page was under surveillance for some of his ties to elements of the Russian intelligence operation or whatever. You know, they thought that Carter Page was either a dupe, a pawn, or an acting agent of Russia, and so they were investigating that. And so it sounds like they're going to use something along those lines to then build out from there, that the FBI was trying to use its vast powers to elect Clinton.
Yeah, and go after Rosenstein now. So what...
appoint Mueller.
Right, and then that guy, he can remove Mueller or he can fire him. What Chris Matthews called it was a slow-motion Saturday Night Massacre.
Right, and so, and I think, and apparently Trump has concluded this too, according to the reporting, that firing Mueller would be a terrible thing for him, and it would make him look insanely guilty. And doesn't look like he's going to try to do that. He's just going to try to discredit Mueller to the utmost degree. We'll see if he pulls that off.
You gonna watch tonight?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't miss it. One of the occupational hazards of this job is that you have to watch the State of the Union, whether you want to or not. All right, see you guys later. Enjoy it.